So it's been a little while since I've been in front of a room this large, so I'm a little nervous, so bear with me while I stuff the butterflies down. I have been involved for a long time with the Seattle Alt.net group and did a lot of presentations around that group, helping to organize those conferences up in Seattle and that sort of thing. But as that movement kind of petered out in Seattle, I kind of stepped back and started to focus on my career a little bit and just do development type work. And when .NET Fringe started up a couple years ago, I really saw that as an opportunity to re-engage with that community that inspired me so much. And last year when I attended, I especially wanted to call out Julie Lerman. I had a conversation with her about how I wanted to re-engage with this community, and I wanted to be back in that place I was with the Alt.net community. And she really encouraged me to try, and she pushed me, and now I'm here, and nervous as hell. So, yeah. So this is me. I go by Not Myself on just about every social media platform humanly available. If that name's not available, I don't go on that platform. I blog at this website, and you can see all of my open source code at that GitHub address. This is actually a picture of me at 17. Way back in '93, I grew up in Northwest Arkansas, and the Raiders were a huge deal in '93 in Northwest Arkansas. I actually didn't start working in the tech industry until I was 22. Up to that point, I actually worked in a Tyson chicken slaughterhouse. And eventually I felt that wasn't a very satisfying career, so I moved out to the Seattle area right as the dot-com bubble was blowing up. And I got a job working in tech support, doing support for Adobe Photoshop. And at that time, most of the people using Adobe Photoshop were very focused on print. And I kind of dug into all of the new web features that were coming out for Photoshop, and I learned what a web palette was, and I learned a little bit of HTML. And through that knowledge, I got a job at a startup who did tech support for other startups, right? And so, let's see. From there, I kind of worked at all of these places, just kind of building on experience, one on top of another, with, I guess, my most notable achievement is actually working on the team that got an Editor's Choice Award in the iTunes store for Stellar. So I've done quite a bit, everything from painful enterprise development to chaotic startups. One of the things that was consistent was working with great people who made a dramatic change in my career trajectory. Every place I worked at, I worked with great people. And I wanted to talk about, in the developer community that I've been involved with, we do a lot of hero worshiping, and we talk about, well, Ted Neward talks about this, and he knows what he's talking about, and he gives really great advice. And Uncle Bob, you should really read Uncle Bob because you're going to get a lot of good knowledge out of that. And all of that hero worship is absolutely earned. But as I was working at all of these places, the one thing that was consistent was I wasn't working with Ted Neward. I wasn't working with Uncle Bob. I was working with everyday developers. And those developers took time out of their lives to help me on that career path and get me moving in the right trajectory. And I could list probably hundreds of people that accomplished that with me, but I kind of want to call out a handful of them. That were instrumental in helping me go down that development path. This person's name is Alex Johnson, and Alex Johnson was a web developer at that startup that I was talking about where we did tech support for other startups. And Alex was a full stack web developer back in '97, right, during the dot-com bubble. He wrote classic ASP, but he used JavaScript because VBScript is ew. Right? He took the time when I engaged with him to talk with me about how I could go from being that tech support guy for Adobe Photoshop who knew a little bit of HTML to actually my goal of becoming an actual web developer in those times. He basically said, you know a little bit of HTML, what you really need to do is you need to learn a programming language. And here we use JavaScript, so why don't you learn JavaScript? And he looked at my work. I would go write some code, and I would bring it back to him, and I'd go, look, Alex, I produced this. And he would critique it for me, and he would show me how I could improve that code. And he helped me focus to the point that I actually got my first web development job working with Alex. I interviewed, I passed the test, and I had enough skills that I was actually able to change from tech support to actual development. One thing to note about Alex is he actually passed away in 2015, so I never really got the opportunity to tell him this, right? So definitely talk to those mentors and let them know what they mean to you. The next person that I'd like to call out is Gene Limkel, and he's a very, very serious database guy. And Gene was kind of interesting because he was the first one that I worked with that viewed me as an actual developer. He actually talked to me in a way that he had confidence that I had the skill to be able to accomplish whatever task I was being assigned, right? Gene introduced me to basic concepts of object-oriented design. He helped me move from a very primitive obsession way of thinking into thinking about collaborative objects and how they interact with each other. He encouraged me also to make the transition from classic ASP into .NET way back when it was like version 1, right? I still know Gene. I still communicate with him regularly. And the last startup that I worked at, Taylorwell, he actually recruited me into it. I went and worked with him for a while again. He still treats me like a peer, and it's really satisfying. This person is Chris Bilson, and I met Chris Bilson through that Seattle Alt.NET group. And this was post.com bubble. And Chris was interesting because I was reading about Agile a lot, reading blog posts, but I didn't really implement any of those things. I read about the concepts, I understood the concepts, but I was kind of one of those developers who's like, well, this is like pie in the sky, nobody actually does this stuff. Chris actually did it, right? He encouraged me to explore other languages. He encouraged me to become very test-focused. He was a big open source advocate. I learned about in Hibernate through working with Chris. He encouraged me to explore other languages besides C# and JavaScript, if for no other reason, just to see how other platforms and other ecosystems approach problem solving, right? Chris also kind of encouraged me to start speaking locally. So I initially started doing code camps and our local users group. I would try to give little presentations. And eventually I started presenting at the Alt.NET national conference, which was a real boost in my career. Chris is still around with us as well. He's currently working, doing amazing things with Azure infrastructure team. And he was here last year. He's not here now, but I bump into him every now and then. And he was a huge influence in my career, so thanks, Chris. I kind of started off talking about hero worship and stuff, and I went and talked about everyday developers, but I want to do a little bit of hero worship at the moment. This is Jim Weirich. And Jim was a Rubyist and an enthusiastic teacher, as well as a board game fanatic. He was heavily involved in the software craftsmanship movement several years back. And he was a teacher who really encouraged beginners to experiment and be playful. And he's probably the friendliest guy on the planet that I've ever met. And he unfortunately also passed away in 2014. And one of the combining things of all of these people that I'm mentioning, other than them being white guys, is that they were all teachers and mentors above and beyond their day-to-day job, right? They could have been that little stereotypical walled-off developer that just sat in a corner and did their job and didn't care about everyone else in the world, But these people, these everyday developers, chose to invest time in the people around them and encourage them to learn new skills. They were all focused on continuous improvement of not only themselves, but their teams and their community around them. And I'll give you an example of that through Jim. Jim is kind of best known, I guess, for being the author of the DotNetCoreKoans, which is a teaching tool that helps you learn Ruby and the basic syntax of Ruby and how to structure Ruby applications by putting your hands on a keyboard and actually writing Ruby code. And I want to show you a little demo of that quickly. Can you guys see that okay? Okay, so the DotNetCoreKoans are a set of unit tests, basically, that execute one at a time until they reach the first failing unit test. And this is the output that you get when you run with DotNetCoreKoans. You can see up at the top that the first cone that I'm working on is about asserts, and the very first one failed. It gives me a little bit of playful encouragement about continuing on and learning Ruby. And then it gives me some information about, hey, go to this file and look at this place and fix whatever's wrong with this code. So let's take a look at what that code looks like. All right. You guys see that okay? All right, and I should have the... I can try. Control plus. Hey, there we go. Okay. So one of the cool things about the DotNetCoreKoans is it's code. You're literally looking at Ruby syntax, and there are comments that are all around about what you need to do to solve these problems. And the very first one that failed was test assert truth, right? So if I go over there and I can actually get my cursor in place. Bam. And so now you can see the output has changed slightly. The very first test, I've passed that. It's expanded my awareness of how to do asserts in Ruby. It gives me some more encouragement, and then tells me where the next issue is that I need to resolve. And basically what you do is you progress through these set of unit tests that introduce you slowly to concepts in Ruby, and by the end of it, you have a fairly decent understanding of how to use the language. When I first encountered this, I kind of fell in love with it. I thought it was amazing. I'd never seen a teaching method like this to get new developers hands on keyboard in such a quick way and actually writing code. So what I did was I started doing presentations using the DotNetCoreKoans, and what I would do is I would come up on stage and I would talk about Ruby and how it's an interesting language and what makes it interesting as a dynamic language versus a static language or functional language or something like that. And then I would bring up the cones and I would do the first one. And I would basically go through the audience, and I'd have somebody come up on the stage, and they would do the next one. And we'd go through as far as we could possibly go through the cones in the allotted time. And at the end of the session, I would say, okay, you're all Rubyists now. You know how to write Ruby code. Go forth and be awesome. And I probably did that, gosh, I don't know, probably 20 times that gave that little presentation. And it was very satisfying. And a few years ago, several years ago, I went to Software Craftsmanship North America in Chicago, and Jim was there, and he was presenting, and he presented on his thing. I think he did the Roman numerals kata live in front of an audience, and the guy was really jovial and just full of joy and really inspiring in that way. And we happened to be staying at the same hotel. And after the conference that night, he set up a big board game, and everybody was just welcome to come sit with him and play this board game. And so I did it. And I kind of told him about this thing that I was doing, with his work. And I was a little nervous because it's like I'm telling this guy, hey, I took your work and I'm kind of doing my own thing with it and being successful with it, and haha. And his response was really amazing. His response was, I've never heard of that. That's a really good idea. You should keep doing it. And that kind of led me to a couple other situations in recent years. I was at a talk by Scott Hanselman a while back, and I don't remember the exact content of the talk, but the gist that I took away from it was he was considering .NET in terms of these coding dojos that people do, and workshops and that sort of thing, and the huge barrier to entry to get a novice developer into the .NET ecosystem. And that huge barrier to entry is, Visual Studio, all the installers, SQL Server, all this sort of stuff. And when you're going into a coding dojo to do this sort of stuff, the people just aren't interested in installing all that stuff when you can just download Node and start hacking, right? So with the release of .NET Core, I saw an opportunity. Can you guys see that? No. There we go. There we go. I saw an opportunity to create a project that was very similar to what Jim had done. And the goal being get someone's hands on a keyboard writing C# as quickly as possible. And I had some other ulterior motives that I wanted to involve in that. One of them was I wanted to encourage people that were in the .NET space to start contributing to open source projects. From my background, .NET has not been very open source friendly, and there are a lot of developers that don't even consider it. So I wanted to, like Scott was saying, cast or Sean, a wider net and get more people involved in open source projects. And this is kind of how I did it. I created the project. I actually cloned a lot of the cones from Corey Foy's DotNetCoreKoans project, and I put it up on GitHub. And I blogged about it a little bit. I created a build and a getter where people can come in and ask me questions. I created the simplest possible getting started guide that I could for how to get in and start working with the cones themselves. And then I put a blurb down at the bottom about contributing back to this project. If you want to create a cone and talk about string interpolation, do it. I also took the time to call out, the inspiration and other people, the developers that I was standing on their shoulders about as well. I also took the time to lay out some issues, and we heard earlier about Up for Grabs, so I registered my project on Up for Grabs, and I tagged things as Up for Grabs, and tagged things that are beginner friendly. And really all I did with this is blog about it and kind of talk about it on Twitter. And I started getting pull requests for adding features into my little project. And one of the ways that I encourage people to keep coming back or show appreciation for them is I would accept their pull request and I'd give them a screenshot showing my gratitude. Thank you. Please come back, right? So I'll show you a couple examples of those because they're fun. So there's another one. Yeah, thanks. And probably the proudest thing that I'm proud of with regards to this tiny little project that's unassuming and people feel comfortable contributing to is the number of people that tell me this. Thanks for accepting. This was my first pull request. And, I give them some encouragement, and so far, the project's been going really well. And I'm pretty happy with that. So that is kind of all I have to say. And I will leave you with that. Thank you for listening to me.